Folks, welcome to the lesson. We're solving quadratic equations today. This time there are two special cases. We are used to quadratic equations with an x squared term, an x term, and a constant number. But what happens when we've got an x squared term and an x term, but no constant? Or what happens when we've got an x squared term and a constant, but no x term? Well, you're going to find out, so let's crack on and get the job done. Welcome to the lesson and welcome back to the last leg of the year, which is these next 5 weeks before we say goodbye to each other for another 7 weeks. Now you may remember before half term we were solving quadratic equations. Let's remind ourselves what a quadratic equation is. It's got an x squared term, it sometimes has an x term, and sometimes it'll have a number here alongside it, but in this case we don't have a number alongside it, and that's what makes it a special case. So quadratics normally have 3 terms. This quadratic only has 2 terms, and so we ask ourselves, okay, well, what do we do then if we don't here have a number alongside? How do we solve a quadratic of this type? Well, we use common factors, and you have done common factors before, so this is a little bit of revision. A common factor is saying, what is it about x squared and x that you can divide by that will go into both x squared and 7x? What can we divide into x squared and 7x? And I hope, having thought about it, we can see that x goes into x squared and 7x. So if we take an x out, what goes in the bracket is, what do we multiply x by in order to give us x squared? What do we multiply x by in order to give us x squared? And the answer to that is x. And then the second part of the bracket is saying, what do we multiply x by that will give us minus 7x? And the answer to that is minus 7. So if we were to multiply this bracket out, x times x minus 7, I hope you can see that we would get x squared minus 7x. So these two things are the same. Therefore, if x squared minus 7x equals 0, it must be that x brackets x subtract 7 equals 0. And now we've got two things, x and a bracket, which when multiplied together give us 0. So for two things multiplied together to give us 0, you may remember this, that one of them has to be 0 or the other thing has to be 0. Well, if one of them is 0, the x, that just is quite simply x equals 0, or the bracket is 0, x subtract 7 is 0. And if this bracket here has to equal 0, then x would have to equal 7. And that's our solution. Here's a second example. Once again, we've got an x squared term, an x term, and no number. Once again, we use common factors. What divides into x squared and 4x? And the answer to that question is x goes into both. And so x times by what needs to go in the bracket? So when I multiply it by x, it will give me x squared plus 4x. And I hope you can see that x plus 4 has to go in the bracket, because if we multiply x plus 4 by the x outside, we will get x squared plus 4x. So x squared plus 4x equals 0 becomes x bracket x plus 4 equals 0. Once again, we've got two things multiplied together to give 0 must mean one of them is 0. And if one of them is 0, then either x outside the bracket is 0, or the bracket itself is 0, which is the x plus 4 must equal 0. And if x plus 4 equals 0, x would have to equal negative 4. So those are our two possible answers. Our second special case is where we've got no x term. Again, we've only got two terms. This time the number there, the constant, is there, but there's no x term. How do we solve that? Well, no factorising necessary. If x squared subtract 25 equals 0, we can simply add 25 to both sides, and then to get from x squared, in order to find x, we square root both sides. And when we square root 25, we get this funny thing here, plus or minus 5. What does that mean? It means x is either positive 5, because positive 5 squared is 25, or x could equal negative 5, because negative 5 times by itself is also 25. So x has two possible values, positive 5 or negative 5. We must include both answers, and we abbreviate it with the plus or minus. Alternatively, you can just write it out as x equals positive 5 or x equals negative 5. Here's a final example for case 2. Note once again there's no x term, so no factorising necessary. X squared subtract 6 equals 0. We simply add 6 to both sides, and then we square root both sides. When we square root x squared, we get x, and when we square root 6, we get plus or minus root 6. And that plus or minus root 6 means x is either positive root 6 or x is negative root 6. And if there's anything about the video you haven't understood, just watch it back. And if you have, that's great, because that's the job done.